and welcome everyone to panel 1 of Decoding Budget 2022 for Science and Innovation. I'm Dr. Eliani Valijaro, the Global Hub Director of Future Earth in Canada and the Executive Director of Sustainability in the Digital Age. I want to take a moment to extend a very warm welcome to all of you and thank you for attending this session of the CSPC Federal Budget Symposium. I would like to begin by acknowledging that I'm located on unceded Indigenous lands. The Kanien'kehá:ka Nation is recognized as the custodians of the lands and waters on which I gather with you today. Tiohtià:ke, Montreal is historically known as a gathering place for many First Nations. Today, it is home to a diverse population of Indigenous and other peoples. We respect the continued connections with the past, present, and future in our ongoing relationships with Indigenous and other peoples within the community. I'm the moderator of this first panel. And I would like for all of you to note that you can only interact with the session through the Q&A feature. I would like to encourage you to upvote the relevant questions that you want to have us answered. And please only use the chat line to communicate with organizers if you're encountering any issues. So I'd like to welcome our 3 panelists. Charmaine Dean is Vice President, Research and International at the University of Waterloo. Malcolm Campbell is the Vice President Research at University of Guelph, and Baljit Singh is the Vice President Research at the University of Saskatchewan. So we just had a very exciting keynote to start with, and I would like to ask each of you to describe the roles and impacts that you see the budget has in academia. So Charmaine, if we can start with you.
Thanks so much, and good afternoon, everyone. I'd also like to take a moment to acknowledge that where I am at the University of Waterloo, much of our work takes place on the traditional territory of the neutral Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee peoples. Our campus is actually situated on the Haldimand Tract, which was land promised to the Six Nations. It includes 6 miles on each side of the Grand River. I wanted to start by noting that the presentation identified priorities related to clean growth and simultaneously a focus on innovation, and identified a need for collaboration in order for that innovation to be successful, including with the academia and the private sector. David Waters emphasized this throughout the presentation. There's a high focus on innovation policy in the budget, which I'll comment on, and I'll also touch on research security and research equity. These are, I think, significant areas of interest, not just to the University of Waterloo, but to universities broadly in Canada. So there is as I said, a focus of the government in supporting the private sectors as drivers of innovation. We saw that in the establishment of the Canada Growth Fund and the new investment agency that's to work with Canadian industries and businesses. And the budget states that this is to help them make the investments they need to innovate, to grow, to create jobs, and to be competitive. As we consider this focus, I'd like to remind everybody, and perhaps especially members of the federal government, that it's really important to note that innovation and knowledge transfer, and really critically talent development, emerge from academic institutions. So the collaboration that's mentioned by Waters would really be effective. Post-secondary in partnership already with businesses and industry to support innovation and to enhance productivity and to drive economic activity. And the talent is really key to driving innovation and commercialization in Canada. So as we look to develop this growth fund and the new investment agency, it would be really important to understand how the academic sector could participate in shaping those industries, given the knowledge that we have, what's needed for, if you take the University of Waterloo, look to us to collaborate on research, to develop technologies and to source talent. And we have an extensive co-op program. and there are so many areas where universities support the entrepreneurship and the commercialization journey: IP management, startup creation, licensing agreements. We understand that entrepreneurship can be costly and risky, and we want to support researchers through the challenging stages of entrepreneurship. Younger individuals are also making the entrepreneurial leap. We have a key role, not just in unleashing innovation into the marketplace, but also creating the conditions for young people to make the best attempts at being entrepreneurs. And this happens when it's done in partnership. And so it's not just in partnership with the academic communities, but in partnership with the business communities to create that real world context for our students. David Waters emphasized that the modern economy is now quite reliant on startups to drive innovation. Without startups, we're going to lower innovativeness. We're going to fail to create a new generation. And without startups, we won't have the scale ups and the scaling out. The scaling out and the opportunity for startups to scale up are really important parts of the dimensions that will drive economic growth, but all three are important. We also advocate, I think it would be important to consider that investments be allocated to vet university-linked associated funds. So, we need early stage risk capital to meet the innovation potential of the talent and research at our universities. So I'd like to take a moment to also talk about research security. The government has pledged to protect Canadian research from foreign threats, and they identify a few key points: supporting research security at Canadian universities. There's this idea about developing a new research security center that's going to provide advice and guidance directly. That's very welcome. And establishing a research chair program to fund research on cutting edge technologies relevant to CSE's activities, including enhancing cybersecurity. As we all know, we saw the gate and the fence in the presentation, and the big threats outside, the bears and the large animals trying to creep in David Watson. Security certainly remains a key concern, and it is a very complicated issue. We also saw the challenges regarding security and trade. It has really important financial implications, but it is an area that needs a lot of support. So we are I think that this advancement by the federal government is really supportive of the need. There are so many aspects that universities are looking at right now: developing risk frameworks and guidelines and principles for managing risks, developing education modules and awareness and training programs, and safeguarding research, just conducting due diligence and risk assessments, and ensuring the security of networks and devices on our systems. These are all activities that are being conducted for some time now by institutions, and activities are increasing in this regard. So the ability to assess some of the federal funds in implementing the initiatives that are operating right now at universities is really important for supporting our researchers in protecting their research and intellectual property. I'm so sorry, Meredith knows that I almost didn't make it here today. I'm experiencing illness. As you can see, I'm in my office, but I'll let everybody know that I did do a COVID test and it's negative. So it's not the fearsome disease. Of course, I wouldn't be in if that were true. So forgive me if I'm croaking all the way through this. The government has also for some time supported an advanced equity. We saw that in the Canada Chairs program. And it's also a key component of many research enterprises. So I'm really glad to see that even with a constrained budget, that there are programs related to EDI, and particularly, the scholarships and fellowships for Black students and researchers. That's really, really helpful. And this, there are certain things that cannot be set aside even in a constrained budget. And so EDI is really important to keep the foot on the gas pedal in this country and at our institutions. The budget didn't focus a lot on the university sector. There are references to important program reviews, and those program reviews, of course, may well lead to efficient definitions of implementation response. And David Waters mentioned the importance of understanding who is going to be involved in those reviews and how they unfold and how they will impact our granting agencies. I think that is really critical, making sure that in the setup of the review framework, there's opportunity for connectivity. And then finally, I'll say that the tensions in economic development and basic and applied research. We're living with a pandemic. We understand the continuing focus on issues related to emerging from COVID. And of course, we have global concerns that drive a focus on defense. But we need to remember that to be quick in response to any crisis, we need to continue to strengthen the research foundation. That base is really important for innovation. Even as we focus on turning innovation inputs into outputs, that substantive effort on keeping that base strong will ensure that we have quick response to any critical item moving forward. Thanks for allowing me the opportunity to participate in this panel, and I'm looking forward to hearing the remarks from my fellow panelists.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Charmaine Dean. I'd like to now go on to Dr. Malcolm Campbell, Vice President Research at University of Guelph.
Thank you very much, Eliane, and it's truly a pleasure to be on this panel today. Thank you for the opportunity and for CSBC to provide it. It's very difficult to follow on from my friend and colleague, Charmaine Dean, who I didn't hear any croaking there at all, Charmaine, and I'm glad to hear that despite the challenges that you're suffering today, that you aren't testing positive for COVID, and I hope that things move in a positive direction for you. Colleagues, I'm speaking today to you from University of Guelph, and University of Guelph is on the traditional and treaty territories of the Mississaugas of the Credit. The land that we reside on and our relationship to it is defined by the dish with one spoon wampum, which is a pact, effectively a covenant that speaks to the necessity for all of us to safeguard and steward the resources, both those that are natural and the human resources that are on this land, to make sure that they function for people going forward in the future. I'd like to focus a little bit on that stewardship role, because in David Waters' discussion of the federal budget, he really focused on the clean growth component of the budget. I'll talk a little bit about that, and I'm not going to go from my prepared notes today, because effectively they would just reiterate what it is that Charmaine did. So rightly or wrongly, I'm going to improvise a little bit here today and hopefully shade in around some of the areas that Charmaine has already so beautifully articulated. I think the whole notion of clean growth and the way that it drove Budget 2022 speaks to multiple facets that Charmaine has already talked about that are resonant with the academic sector. And those really have to do with the role that the academic sector plays in creating knowledge, adding value to it, and then purveying it in a way that has an impact in society at large. When it comes to clean growth, universities play an absolutely critical role in developing the new knowledge, in adding value to it, and purveying it in a way that actually creates the innovative potential that enables that clean growth to occur, including, of course, all the way along that continuum, providing the talent pool that is going to people the industry in the years to come and drive that clean growth not only in the period covered by the budget, but in the years and the decades beyond. So universities are very, even though not necessarily explicitly referred to in the budget, or not to a great extent, I believe that they're deeply embedded within the concept of clean growth and many of the other individual facets that are touched upon in more detail within the budget. I think if in addition to clean growth, and I know that David did talk about this in his introductory remarks, I would say this was very much an innovation budget. It wasn't, if it's an R&D budget, it's heavy on D and less on R. In the academic sector, we're hopeful that there's more on the R component as we come to the end of the 2018 to 2023 period, where there was a greater infusion of funding in the tri-agencies, as an example. We're hopeful that we'll see more in next year's budget, but this year's budget was very much focused on that innovation component and innovation around clean growth and other aspects of the economy. And I think we've heard this from other commentators. You can see it in the Globe and Mail. You can see it in comments that have been made by the Canadian Council of Innovators and the like, that in many ways, this was a mature innovation budget. That is to say, there was great thought given to things that are less unicorn and rainbows in terms of the vision around them, much more pragmatic and driven towards providing competitive deliverables. And I see Dan Bresnitz's fingerprints all over this in terms of the maturity that one sees on the innovation side. In that regard, we do see the investment in the growth fund, of course, but also the $1 billion investment that's meant to be occurring in the new independent Institute for Innovation, and whatever shape that takes going forward in the future. It obviously is very much tied, as David talked about, to the techies or the Business Finland concept, as well as to the Israel Innovation Authority, in terms of finding ways of mobilizing knowledge into the innovation space and commercializing it in a way that really provides economic advantage. Something that seems to be a much better fit for Canada than the vision that was provided in Budget 2021 around CARPA. CARPA seemed to be an idea that had some traction, but less maybe pragmatic in terms of thinking about how it would ultimately be executed. I saw a wisecracker say that we've gone from carpe diem, seizing the day, to carpe done. And I would say it is a marked note around the maturity of this particular budget that notion has gone to be replaced by this the institute that will provide, I think, a much more Canadian and pragmatic approach to innovation. I think universities will, and the academic sector more generally, that actually, while they aren't mentioned explicitly as it relates to that, and it's meant to be a business-oriented or business-run, both the fund and also the institute, I do very much see academic institutions, and in particular universities, being very much embedded within the ecosystem that will be created by that $1 billion investment. And that's because universities are effectively vertically integrated, as I've already mentioned, with regards to the pathway from innovation to impact, creators of knowledge, adders of value to that knowledge through innovation, and then the mobilization of that knowledge, that innovation in a way that is impactful. It's impossible for me to imagine that $1 billion investment will not connect itself to the 100 institutions that are effectively the knowledge and innovation engine in this particular country. So while the universities are not explicitly mentioned in that regard, with regards to these particular investments, I still see that they are very much embedded within the concept of what is going to be realized there. We see other instances where, again, one might not necessarily see universities living in that space, but the maturity around the innovation component of the budget, where it certainly will touch on our activities, the review of the Science Research and Experimental Development Fund, SHRED, operating within the NRC, is a good example in that regard. So I think very much opportunities there for universities, as they do already, to be participating within the knowledge economy, within the innovation sector, to really be providing the raw fuels and the talent pool upon which that will be built, even though we aren't mentioned by name in that particular part of the budget. Where we are mentioned explicitly, and Charmaine has already talked about very articulately, and which I think is very important, is how we're managing that that vertical, that value chain from knowledge creation to impact. And that is as it relates to foreign interference within that particular process. It's fantastic to see that the federal government has made investments in providing the resources that are necessary for universities to safeguard against foreign interference in the research enterprise. It's something that has been done as an unfunded mandate over the course of the last year. Of course, we all are very much concerned about safeguarding research within our respective institutions, but this has been an unfunded mandate over the course of the last year. And it's fantastic to see the federal government make that $25 million a year investment that will be released through the Research Support Fund going forward over the next 5 years, and presumably with $25 million worth of funding and hopefully more in the years that will transpire after that. So great to see that investment being made directly in universities in support of the research enterprise and the management thereof. I think when it comes to other explicit investments, just thinking briefly about the talent pool, one investment that may not be seen as necessarily directly related to universities, but I believe most certainly is the visa processing, obviously, for international students, many of whom will find themselves in obviously in academia, but in universities specifically. This $386.7 million over 5 years is meant to really help ensure the timely processing of visa students, enabling international students to infuse their great intelligence and their diversity within the talent pool development pathway that we have here in Canada, that particular pipeline. So great to see that particular investment. And of course, also a very explicit investment of around $41 million over 5 years for funding Black researchers. Again, Charmaine touched on this. We've got a fantastically activist government as it relates to equity, diversity, inclusion, and indigenization here in Canada. It's great to see very explicit investments being made in that particular space, and was fantastic to see that particular investment. There are others that I could speak to. One that is particularly resonant for us at University of Guelph as Canada's food university, the $100 million over 5 years being invested in decarbonizing agriculture and having climate smart agriculture through the introduction of and creation of new technologies, new processes. An explicit mention, and I'll say this, it really touched my heart as a plant biologist by training, on new crop development as well. So I'm viewing this as a harbinger. I'm hopeful that this is a harbinger for investment more explicitly in the R side of R&D in next year's budget. I think I've spoken at length, touching on I think very explicit fragments around the beautiful story that Charmaine has painted already. And I think I'll stop there to enable my friend and colleague Baljit Singh to take the floor, and also for us to sooner get to questions where I think we can really get into some nuts and bolts with the audience today. Thanks so much, Eliane, for the opportunity to speak, and passing the baton over to Baljit.
Thank you very much, Malcolm. As a plant molecular geneticist by training, it was great to get your shout out to agriculture. So Dr. Baljit Singh, on to you. We look forward to your remarks as well.
Thank you very much, Eliane, and colleagues, Charmaine and Malcolm, for your comments. And University of Saskatchewan is located on Treaty 6 territories, but today I am in Calgary, which is Treaty 7 territory of the First Nation. And Siksika, Pekani, Kanai, Tustina, Shiniki, Wesley, and Bearspaw First Nations were calling Calgary as their home. and so were the Métis. So I acknowledge these lands on which we get to live and work. And hopefully we will continue to do things within the universities to open opportunities for many of those in our country who have not had those opportunities of prosperity and a better life so far. That's our commitment in the academy to do that. I'm really delighted to be able to make few comments today about the budget. I won't take too much time, but one aspect which I would like to address is a bit high level, similar to Malcolm's, that although the budget may not clearly speak to the universities in the money and the allocations, but there are so many components within the budget that actually cannot be accomplished without participation of the universities, actually the meaningful participation of the universities. Anything related to attraction of the high quality talent to Canada through investment in immigration processes to make them better, more than $300 million in that, $1 billion in the new agency, the details of which are very sketchy. Investment into Black scholars, growth through fellowships. So the university's role is very central to that. So those relationships will become more apparent in the coming days and months when the allocations are made in real dollars. The second point I want to make is that universities as the source of fundamental science and also applied science has been there for since the concept of the modern university, and starting with the Humboldt University in Germany, and then from that point onwards. One of the things in Canada which we believe can be strengthened even more is the link between the universities and the private sector. I think we still have not found an eloquent way of creating those connections. There are thousands of theses which are written in the universities every year. How many of those do actually get mobilized in a very explicit and intentional manner in the service of the Canadians is the question which we need to answer very carefully and find a better way of really mobilizing the dollars which Canadians have invested in the universities already, as to how do we get that into creating a better life for the Canadians across our country. The one point which I would like to speak to is the COVID-19 and our resilience to tackle the future pandemics or any epidemic or any outbreak of an infectious disease within our country. We know what happened when the system which was put in place 15, 18 years ago was allowed to go silent. And we took some time to recover and organize ourselves to tackle the threat of the pandemic. The new allocation to the PHAC, about $400 million, I believe it is, to really do preparedness when and if a future infectious disease threat comes our way. But again, PHAC itself is not able to deliver on that mandate. The science which occurs across this country in the universities, in the colleges, in institutes like Vaccine Infectious Disease Organization at University of Saskatchewan, or the clusters of vaccinology infectious disease in the Toronto and surrounding universities, Guelph, University of Toronto, McMaster, their Global Nexus program, and the technology development which takes place in places like Waterloo and others, to create a better system of resiliency to infectious disease threat is something which we need to develop further. I think the COVID-19 clearly shown the gaps in not only preventing the emergence of the threat, but also predicting and controlling it. When it comes to preventing the emergence of threat, the role of the agriculture sector, for example, looking into the animal health, that's where many threats come to us, developing better environmental mitigation strategies so that the contact between animals and humans is managed in a better way. Then developing the prediction technologies using the outstanding ecosystem in the Waterloo area, taking that biological sciences into technology platforms is very critical. So if the PHAC is going to deliver on that mandate, the engagement of the university sector into that will be needed in a very robust and a very active manner. We talk about many systems around the world. There is Israeli system of innovation, there's the Finland's system, but I'm a bigger fan of the German ecosystem, where the traditional universities are alongside the applied technology universities, and their technical high schools exist there. And so does their cluster of Helmholtz, Max Planck, and other research institutes which German federal government has. So those types of connections will help us create a better system to not only tackle the next pandemic threat, but many other entities like securing our water, securing our food, and developing better export markets for our products. So I will stop here, Eliani, and then wait for the questions for the discussion. So thank you so very much for this opportunity to be here today.
Thank you very much for your remarks. This is a really great place for us to start thinking. I encourage the audience to think of questions you would like to please put in the Q&A, and remember that we can vote up or down those questions in terms of the urgency to answer these. And so one of the things I really think that is critical, and the data from the OECD clearly says we need to find ways of translating the research in Canada into impact and productivity. And so I'm going to ask all three of our distinguished panelists these questions. What do you see are the biggest barriers to going from discovery to innovation and entrepreneurship? Dr. Charmaine Dean, would you like to start? Or I see Dr. Baljit, you still have your
Yeah.
oh, please go ahead. Charmaine.
Baljit, would you prefer to start, or?
Charmaine, go ahead, please.
So, I think I'll just reflect on some of the things that Baljit said in my response. And Malcolm also alluded to this as well. One of the things that we know is important is sizable and simple startup funds, non-dilutive grants to support commercialization of high technology innovations. Lack of value added early stage investments, the access to incubation, the mentors, the board developments, and the lack of technical knowledge in our investment community, because this has the really unfortunate effect of making Canadian investors very risk averse to, especially for disruptive technologies. And Canada is, I think, one of our most famous technology developments lie in the disruptive arena. At Waterloo in quantum and AI, Malcolm talked about food and food security. A lot of high risk work is being done there, and then Baljit in the whole water area. So being able to help investors understand the importance of working in the high risk sector and what are the ways to assess that. I would say the ability to move from scale up to startup, to cross that chasm, and that involves being able to have all the tools that are necessary, from space, a bit more investment from more individuals being able to step up to the plate and support. So that the chasm between the startup and the scale up Canada. And then when you think about the chasm between, I think David Waters talked about this, between the scale up and the scale out. I know that there are particular areas in Canada. So Sherbrooke has this, where there are test beds. So being able to have a manufacturing plant that doesn't go from in a lab condition, but goes in a real world condition to understand, what are the things that need to be put in place in order to be able to manufacture in large batches, and we can have the sorts of precision that are available in a prototype setting like a lab. So those opportunities to be able to jump that chasm from developing something in a highly sensitive workspace to developing something in a dirty workspace, and developing it mass produced and yet being able to test it and remove the bugs, that prototype test bed of activity in our discovery parks, we need more of those, and that needs support.
So who would like to follow? Dr. Rajit Singh, would you like to go ahead?
Sure. I will just add one point. So when we talk about the structure, the structure through which the fundamental knowledge flows out to the communities, whether those are private sector community organizations, or it is a policy piece that goes to the government to create a better framework. So quite often, that journey from an individual professor to the target is very complex for an individual professor. So the pipeline or the mechanism does exist in many universities, but quite often within the university, there's not that deep level of awareness as to how to do that piece. There are innovation offices, there are industry liaison offices. What at University of Saskatchewan we have seen is when there are institutes like Global Institute for Food Security, for example, which is heavily focused on development of agriculture technologies for phenotyping, imaging, and those types of things, that professors can congregate in those institutes, which become a portal out into the private sector, instead of the colleges led by the deans creating those portals. So I think if the institutes and the clusters can be created in a thoughtful way and can be linked to the world outside, I think that creates a better flow of the fundamental knowledge out into the technology development. Similar example is the vaccine and the infectious disease organization. During the pandemic, hundreds of private sector entities have come to that institute to do their drug testing, preclinical testing, biomolecular research, and variety of other things. So I think the institutes sitting alongside colleges could be one of the mechanisms that we are finding at University of Saskatchewan is helpful. Dr. Charmaine Dean and I work with Global Institute for Water Security and Global Water Futures Program. So there also technology development piece seems to be starting to move in a much more nimble way compared to in the past. So thank you.
Thank you. So Dr. Malcolm Campbell, would you like to add anything in terms of what you see are barriers?
Yeah, I would, Eliane, and thanks very much for the opportunity to add to the great comments that have already been made by Charmaine and Baljeet. I'd like to build on something that Charmaine talked about, which is the capital investment, particularly in helping to transition innovation, mobilization of that innovation into the commercial space, the movement of startup to scale up, and really being active in effectively global markets. And one of the challenges that we have here in Canada, as Charmaine explicitly talked about, is investment in our own successes in that regard. One of the great things that was present in budget 2022 was a $25 million investment in the Canada Health Network, which is really addressing I think a challenge that we do have in Canada in supporting our own homegrown innovators that help them move from startup to scale up. And that is through public procurement, the purchasing of our own technologies here in Canada. When you think of novel technologies that are developed in the health tech space, or more generally in the pharmaceutical space, we aren't investing in our own innovation here in the country in a way that would really help it get its feet underneath it before it goes to international markets. I think one of the most dismaying things, and having gone through this recently on a personal level, my father having contracted COVID last week and having a grand bag, if you will, of comorbidities, is looking for opportunities to provide treatment there using, for example, monoclonal antibody technologies that were homegrown, developed here in Canada by AbCellera, that are being used in the United States as standard of care for people that are immunocompromised or otherwise aged and could really use those monoclonal treatments for COVID-19. We don't have them available here in Canada. So bamlanivimab at the beginning of the pandemic, we did eventually have it here in Canada, but it became standard of care in the United States before it did here in Canada. And now with the change to the Omicron variant, where bamlanivimab isn't working anymore, but bebtelovimab, another product made by or developed by, invented by Canadians, by AbCellera, standard of care in the United States, not available here in Canada. We need to be investing in our own technologies and our own innovations here in Canada to make sure that we see the successes that they enjoy. And that goes from procurement all the way to investment. And Charmaine's already done a great job in talking about investment. One thing that I would say, though, a great disappointment when I was in Israel and looking at the Israeli innovation ecosystem, and I'd say, how do all of these startups get supported? They said, oh, our magic weapon is Ontario Pension Fund and Ontario Teachers Pension Fund. And I'm like, they're investing in Israeli companies and not in Canadian companies. We need to have homegrown investment in homegrown products. So that capital piece really important. But if you talk to startups right now and you talk to scale-ups and even established companies, one of the things that they will say to you again and again, they need talent pool. And I know that this is for something that Baljit and Charmaine have heard recurrently. I know that Charmaine hears it recurrently from the CEO of Communitech. Chris Albinson talks about the necessity for talent pool and for universities like the three that are on the call here today to be creating that talent pool that's really going to help drive the innovation ecosystem to not only have support today's innovations, but to be creating the innovators of tomorrow. The other, sorry, and I'm going to finish with one thing here, and that is the opportunity that exists, Eliane, to help move the innovation ecosystem forward by helping to de-risk technologies, to have sandboxes that allow us to de-risk new technologies so that before they're adopted as industry standard, they've already been proved out, and we know that they're going to be effective within whatever context they're being marketed. At University of Guelph, we're immensely proud to operate a 15 field station network here where we are production scale for agriculture, but we aren't production dependent, which enables us to onboard new technological developments, trial them on site while training that talent pool and de-risking them for adoption within the agri-food sector on the one hand, and also creating market opportunity for those innovators on the other hand. So I think there's a great role for universities to be playing in helping to wisen up the capital investment side of things, certainly to be providing the pipeline for that talent pool, and then also be providing sandboxes, playgrounds. And effectively, Baljit talked about this with regards to these adjacent institutes where you're effectively trialing out new technology to make sure that you've de-risked it before it goes to market. So those are my three pieces today. And you'll note, I did not once mention IP protection, which seems to be a preoccupation of all governments here in Canada. I think that's a matter for debate, maybe for another day, or we can discuss it in the remainder of the questions.
It's a very exciting one that needs to be addressed, and maybe we can tie it into this. Two of the questions that have come up are both related to innovation incubators. So in a way, how we value either the protection of the innovation, or we value the capacity to deploy and scale out. So I think that those tensions are really critical ones. And so David Hode, I was asking in terms of what are examples that you see are the most successful innovation incubators in Canada? And Aaron Maxwell asks, do you see a necessity for homegrown innovation incubators as opposed to Canadian startups having to go to the US or the EU for significant incubator and funding opportunities? And how do we get some of more of that Ontario Pension Fund staying here in Canada? So would either of you like to start?
I will volunteer Charmaine for that one.
I'm happy to contribute, and I know Malcolm would very much like to contribute as well. So we should make sure that we've brought Malcolm in here. Uh, Velocity at the University of Waterloo is a really successful incubator. There's a lot of statistics on the web related to Velocity. It's facilitated the creation of more than 400 companies and 5,000 jobs, and their success rate, their 5-year success survival rate is over 60%. So that, I would say that from my viewpoint, that is one of the major success stories in Canada. But there are a number of others across, and I know Malcolm is itching to talk about others. I would say what would be really useful is perhaps to be able to identify a few key incubators and develop what are the mechanisms that they have in common for success. And we also know that the mechanisms that are different are also important, because our university is situated in an area where we're focusing mostly on high tech and deep tech. So, quantum, cybersecurity, AI, and bioengineering. Whereas Baljit, he will be focused mostly on water. Well, I don't want to name what you'd be focusing on, but it would be different. And we know Malcolm is severely focused on agriculture, and that is so important for Canada, both the water and agriculture. So different kinds of technologies will need different kinds of opportunities for startups to be successful. But there have been many thoughtful discussions on these and how they're different across Canada. So I'd be happy, Elaine, to provide something to CSPC if you'd like to share some documentation. We've got a new council at the institution that's focused on thought leadership in innovation, and I'm happy to get a reach out there and provide some information on contrasts. What's common that's successful, and then what is needed in differential areas to be successful. So I'll do that afterwards. Elian, I'll take the opportunity as I'm on the floor. Malcolm said this, and it's really important. All three of us said it earlier, but in your previous question, talent is really important. Talent is what we hear over and over from our entrepreneurs. We need more of these. We need more of these. So that whole production type pipeline with an entrepreneurial spirit is really important for Canada. I know that Malcolm said it. I just wanted to take a minute to emphasize. Malcolm, I know you're itching to add to the conversation. I'll pass it over to you.
Thanks, Charmaine. And I consider any day when Charmaine Dean doubles down on something that I said to be a successful day. So thank you ever so much, Charmaine. One thing I do want to just elaborate on that talent pool piece. You've got 3 vice presidents research and innovation, or international in the case of Charmaine here on the call today. I think one of the things that universities do that is fantastic in terms of creating that talent pool is colliding knowledge base, or effectively standard pedagogy, with the research enterprise, connecting people with the process of discovery so that they understand how to make discoveries, how to solve problems through the process of discovery, is exactly the kind of talent pool that we want. And I think that's a great advantage that universities offer, is that we are both creators of knowledge and purveyors of knowledge. And so combining education with the creation of knowledge, that creates a unparalleled powerful talent pool. The question was around incubators. And I would say the great strength of Canada is that we've got a remarkable innovation ecosystem when it comes to incubators and accelerators. And I think it's important to note that we've got both flavors, both opportunities for startups to get their feet underneath them, as well as opportunities for effectively established companies to go to being revenue generating, profit making, and scaling up into global markets. So we've got effectively a beautiful ecosystem, and I'm a great believer in strong ecosystems, that it's not any one point that is going to make you powerful. It's multiple points, and crucially, the way that you network them. And I think that's a piece that we're missing here in Canada. We probably don't network our incubators and accelerators the best that we possibly can. And with full disclosure, before I move on to my next point, I think there are some examples of where that's occurring. I do sit as a board member of the Ontario Centre of Innovation, which attempts to create that intercollated network of accelerators and incubators across the province of Ontario, where we've got absolutely powerful incubators and accelerators. Velocity, as Charmaine already mentioned, and there in Waterloo, a beautiful built-out ecosystem where you've got Velocity, you've also got the Accelerator Center, and Charmaine and I both sit on the board of the Accelerator Center, and you've got, of course, Communitech, probably arguably the most powerful accelerator here in the country. In addition to that, here in the province, we've got, of course, the Creative Destruction Laboratory, the DMZ at Ryerson, Innovate Ottawa, the Mars Discovery District, really an incredible built-out ecosystem where, as I said, I think what we just need is some better networking, development of standardized tools and approaches across those ecosystems. And to their credit, and back to the federal government and the federal budget, I think some of that is being catalyzed to some extent by investments through regional economic development agencies like FedNor, FedDev Ontario as two examples. So I think we've got great examples here in the country. I think really what we need to be doing is thinking about how do we capture the value that's being generated in those through the points that I already raised: capital, talent, de-risking. Thanks for the opportunity again, Eliane.
Pleasure. So Katrina Hitchman asks, in terms of the previous presentations, services and knowledge is 70% of the economies, whereas much of the innovation discussion seems to still be around technology commercialization. What do you think the incubator model is that we need to recognize and address this need around how do we leverage the power of services and innovation in Canada? So, yeah, any takers?
I wonder, actually that's an excellent question. Again, if you're talking about service and knowledge, if you take a step away from the technology as we do understand most of the time, that takes us into social sciences, humanities, and the fine arts in this country. And the funding mechanisms that flow through social sciences, humanities, and the Research Council of Canada, and through other funding bodies, are very critical in developing the talent in those areas. We do know we can develop all the vaccines, we can develop all the technologies. If our communities are not ready to embrace those, we will not be any further ahead. So creating that awareness and investments and bringing them to the forefront, the study of the human behavior, cultural practices, even the integration of hundreds and thousands of students who are coming to Canada every year, and 90% of them stay here now to become permanent resident. How do we create better communities? And out of their communities arise people who take leadership roles in local organizations and businesses. And I don't know how many CEOs I have met who have degrees in English and political studies and economics and so forth, but not in biological sciences. So it is interesting that that part of the story in the innovation ecosystem, sometimes we don't pay attention to in our country. And that we do at our own peril. And with that, we do at a major cost to the productivity in this country. I think we need to begin to pay more attention. I think I also fail in my role as VP Research to advocate more robustly about those areas. I think this is something which we need to do, if I understood the question correctly, though. And so thank you very much.
So I think that's a great point. I'll just pass it on to you, Charmaine. It's really going from STEM to STEAM and that needed integration. I think of a venture capitalist that I met who was actually a major in literature. And her capacity for storytelling allowed the technology to be lived in ways that people wanted to engage and were willing to take risks at earlier stages. And so, Charmaine, please.
Thanks, Elaine. I just wanted to add emphasis to Baljit's comment. This has always been important, but coming out of the current pandemic, where the social inequities are front and foremost, and it's not just that they're front and foremost, but there is an intentional and meaningful interest in communities, especially in Canada, to address them. This, I think, is going to be really important for our incubators. We have a peace incubator at the university. We have an indigenous incubator, and we have something that's called greenhouse. And I mean, this may also link with Malcolm's interest. The greenhouse is not a greenhouse in terms of growing plants, Baljit. I know you have a biological bent in your expertise, but it's an incubator for sustainable activities, for sustainable development. And there are other activities across Canada, for example, with the Sustainable Development Goals now becoming so important at all of our institutions. So there is, I think that just to amplify Baljit's comments, that coming out of this pandemic, there's a strong interest by communities that this gains serious prominence and that we change the way we look at economics into more social economics. And that's going to hopefully have a strong impact in the sorts of incubators that we see arising and the different kinds of mentors that we need. The individuals and the different kinds of pitch competitions that we need as well. So a whole turnover in the way that we manage the entrepreneurship file will be required with this different kind of focus. It's just an amplification. Baljit expressed it very well, but I think that the pandemic has really driven this focus for us.
Can I jump in, Eliane, and just to say, first of all, amazing question, fantastic question. And Baljit knocked it out of the ballpark when he drove the answer to the question towards humanity and social sciences. And Charmaine followed regards to talking about what effectively is called community engaged scholarship. And the question was originally around what sort of incubation model would be ideal for deriving these sorts of innovations as one goes forward. And I would say community engaged scholarship institutes, which are resident right across the country. And Charmaine talked about an example or a couple of examples at University of Waterloo. Similarly, we have a community engaged scholarship institute at University of Guelph, where again, it's understanding what the public needs, the social needs are around provision of services. And really having the need driven by the community. So this isn't effectively helicoptering and dropping people in and saying, we've got all the solutions for you and we're going to drive them out of our intellect. It's really asking people first, and then through the lens, I believe, of strong social science and humanities scholarship, deriving answers that actually address the need of the community, rather than reversing the balance on that relationship. And I think Charmaine's absolutely right. If the pandemic has done nothing else, it's been a grand leveler in that regard, and understanding that we need to understand communities first and hear from communities first and be answerable to communities in driving that sort of innovation. So it's very much a different model. I would describe it as innovation pull as opposed to innovation push, much of which we've been talking about in the technological development space is being disrupted by pushing a new technology out there. In this instance, it's really listening to communities and having an incubator model then that is built on innovation pull.
Thank you all. Sadly, we've run out of time. There's so many more things that would be so interesting to share. And Baljit, I'd just like a question related to how do we ensure that tenure takes into account that capacity for innovation and commercialization. But I also note the tension that we need to, Alexandra Millette also says that we need to be aware of when we're pulling researchers or professors away from teaching to commercialization. Are we actually allowing them to train talent the way we need them to? So the tension between teaching and creating the enabling space to jump in and actually get into startup mode and understand how we move forward are tensions we need to hold as we figure out how to move Canada higher on those OECD innovation scales. So this has been a very exciting conversation. I wish we had way more time. I really would like to thank our three incredible panelists. So thank you very much for your time and energy today. So for all of our attendees, thank you for being with us today. So we're going to be entering a 30-minute break. The next session will start at 3 p.m. We'll have the opportunity during that next panel to hear from the following amazing speakers: Mark Agnew, Senior Vice President, Policy and Government Relations at the Canadian Chamber of Commerce; Karen Hamburg, member of the Industry Strategy Council and member of the Clean Technology Economic Strategy Table; Karima S. Sabar, CEO and partner at Quark Ventures; Norma Kozaya, Vice President Recherche and Economist in Chief at the Conseil du Patronat du Québec. So thank you all so much and see you at 3 p.m. And Malcolm, Charmaine, Baljeet, thank you so much. So please, for all of you, before you get off, if you can just answer the feedback panel. It's just one question and it will not take much of your time. So thank you very much and see you in half an hour.